Hello and welcome to some under the radar pre-modern decks that you might not have seen yet. They're all performing very well in events recently, but I have not made the deck techs yet, but I will one day. So first up is Horror Stompy. This deck uses these 3 mana horrors, and for 3 mana we really get some absolutely huge stats here. They are massive, so in the pre-modern format they will definitely come with a big drawback, and they do. So one of them can't block, and when it deals combat damage you have to sacrifice a permanent. The other has trample, which is an upside, but we have to sacrifice 1 permanent for every damage dealt to it. So we have to sacrifice a lot of stuff for these big creatures. And so the deck mitigates this drawback by playing cards that give us value or things we want to sacrifice. For example, Sarcomancy gives us a 2/2 token and leaves us with an annoying enchantment that we actually don't want in play, so it's a perfect thing to sacrifice. It also plays some cards that buff our creatures to ensure that we just kill our opponents super quickly. This one can get the creatures around blockers and prevent them from taking damage. The green builds play Call of the Herd as it's an inbuilt 2-for-1, and Rancor is perfect for those sacrifice effects as we can just bring it back to our hand and replay it, and it gives Trample to Drinker of Sorrows, which can just end the game super quickly. Green also has some excellent sideboard options. And so the rest of the deck tends to just be tempo cards. They all do play Dark Ritual, and many of them do play the Soul Lands like City of Traitors or Ancient Tomb, and a lot of them do also play things like Snuff Out or other alternate casting cost removal. Here's an example of a green-black build. As you can see, it's got 4 copies of Rancor and Call of the Herd. As far as I'm aware, the mono-black builds are currently performing better in events. Here's an example of one of those. You can see the creatures it plays are slightly different. It plays more sort of value creatures like Phyrexian Rager and more disruption like Discard. And this one is becoming much more high profile recently. It's Contamination Control. It's done very well in some big events. It works around the combo of these 2 cards. So Contamination says whenever a land is tapped for mana, it produces black instead of its normal type and amount, meaning it can just lock non-black decks out of the game effectively. There are some ways to get around it, but not very many. However, the downside is during our upkeep, we must sacrifice a creature or sacrifice Contamination. But this is where the Nether Spirit comes in, because at the beginning of our upkeep, if Nether Spirit is the only creature in our graveyard, we can return it to play, then sacrifice it to the Contamination, and then just repeat forever, effectively locking our opponent. The deck uses some tutor or pseudo-tutor effects, such as these 2 cards. Diabolic Intent is an actual tutor, and Tainted Pact is kind of a pseudo one. The rest of the deck is just filled with Disruption, Discard, Removal, and Zombie Infestation. And this deck does tend to play a lot of alternate casting cost spells as a way to help with the tempo and clean up the board so we can quickly establish that lock. And as I did mention, this deck is one of the most well-known ones from this video. It has been doing very well recently, and more people have been checking it out. It's just a really solid control deck. And moving on to Worship's Web, which is a deck I see doing consistently well recently. It's a mid-range deck that uses some of the elements of White Weenie, such as Mother of Runes, Silver Knight, and great cards like Swords to Plowshares and Exalted Angel. The deck also plays an Enlightened Tutor package to help it get some of the usual suspects, such as cards to deal with graveyards, artifacts, or enchantments. The deck also has Cursed Scroll, which is incredible for just grindy matchups, dealing with creatures that may have protection, or just finishing off the game. And it also has Worship, which is incredible against those red decks with our protection from red creatures. It can be very difficult for them to beat this. And it does have Mastercore, which you don't really see that often in these style decks. It's just really good in those grindy matchups, and it has an ability that can really give a lot of decks trouble. It also has Sabo's Web, which is a card I love. It replaces itself by drawing a card, and there are so many lands that this thing stops from untapping. Manlands, Wastelands, Richland Ports, there's really just so many. And the deck combines this with red. Both Grim Lavamancer and Goblin Legionnaire have damage dealing abilities to pick off annoying creatures or deal some extra damage to the face. And the deck is full of burn. It plays Gemstone Mine so we can actually cast ice. And you'll notice there's 2 X spells. Well, the deck actually does play Ancient Tomb. So Ancient Tomb not only helps to power out those big X burn spells, but it also just speeds up the deck in general. We can use it to cast a turn 1 Sabo's Web or to speed up Mastercore. Here's an example list. As I said, it's been doing really well in events on TC decks recently, and I really love this deck. It looks super fun. And so another slightly more well-known one is Big Red. Big Red uses all of the burn and board control elements of red, combined with 4 of each Powder Keg and Nevinyrral's Disc. These help to deal with artifacts, and especially in Disc's case, enchantments, which red usually struggles with. While this is going on, the deck is full of manlands that can help to attack and block, and it specifically plays Thawing Glaciers. This effectively lets us play a land every single turn, which is super important in this deck as it is very, very mana hungry. The late game uses both Shard Phoenix and Hammer of Bogarden. The Phoenix can be sacrificed to deal 2 damage to non-flyers, and Hammer does 3 damage to any target. So in our upkeep, we can pay the mana and then we can return those to our hand. This is super useful, and it can just really give the deck such a grindy late game element that is difficult for a lot of decks to deal with. And Urza's Rage is just a huge, big mana spell that can't be countered or prevented, so it's a good card against control decks, and especially can get around Circle of Protection red or annoying things like that. And that really is one of the strengths of this deck. It has a lot of ways around the cards that usually give red problems in the manlands and the artifact removal, so it's really a very strong deck. And so this is one I actually have made a deck tech for. You can check that out on my channel. I went 6-0 with this in one of the most recent monthlies. Mono Black Clerics is a super strong deck, and it uses all the synergies of Clerics combined with some great black cards. Dark Supplicant is a cleric that allows us to sacrifice 3 clerics to search our hand, graveyard or library for a Scion of Darkness and put it into play. The Scion isn't super strong, but it's definitely strong enough it can give opponents headaches, and when combined with things like Cabal Therapy, sometimes you can just return something amazing with it and the game will just be over like that. But that's not where the synergies stop. Rotlung Reanimator is an absolutely incredible card, and it will transform any of our clerics that die into a 2/2 zombie. All of our creatures are clerics unless, they've already died and become a zombie, so this is just incredibly strong. And it can be paired with things like Cabal Archon, which allows us to sacrifice a creature to drain for 2. And this effect is much stronger than it looks. It only takes a few creatures to really just swing games around. The whole engine is sped up by Dark Ritual and Priest of Gix, which just really turbocharge this deck, and the Priest is actually errated to be a cleric. And the rest of the deck just has the general black cards you'd expect, such as discard, removal, maybe some value generating card like Patriarch's Bidding or Cursed Scroll. Here is my actual list that I went 6-0 with. I've been asked quite a lot for that, so there it is. Sorry I don't have it in text version. Here is one in text version. This is not my list, but it is a different list. I don't play Unearth. If you've enjoyed the video, please like, comment, subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching.